we are a vessel filled with profound gifts for the world that is coming from our deepest love and caring for life. And the dominant culture will, do a lot to try to convince us that we don't have that power, or that it's not important, or we can't do whatever it is we think we want to do, but we can.
Cynthia, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast, and thank you so much for managing all my complete chaos with the time. How are you, and where are you this lovely October day?
Thank you so much for having me, Manda. It's really wonderful to meet you and be here. I am in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the Mountain Time Zone, and I'm really delighted to be here today on a very beautiful October day here too.
Thank you. I would ask about the election, but actually it's probably too painful for almost everybody, so let's not go there. Let's start with the fact that you have written an astonishing book, which is an account of an astonishing life. The book is called Summoned by the Earth, Becoming a Holy Vessel for Healing Our World. And as I probably will say in the introduction, we'll say again in the outro, anyone listening to this podcast needs to read this book. If you're interested at all in any of the spiritual work that we do, Cynthia is living it and lays out very nicely the steps to get there. So Cynthia, it's a very long story and there's a lot that happens, but I would like a little bit of grounding of how you came to do any of this. Just way, way, way back to the beginning of Cynthia, to what was it that spurred you from, let's call it a mundane life, a modernity life, to a spiritual life?
Oh, well, so no, I grew up in a very agnostic family. My parents were not churchgoers. They really rejected any kind of spiritual tradition. My father grew up as a Christian Scientist, and then his mother and his brother died very young because they wouldn't seek medical help. So that was very disillusioning to him. My mother's family were semi-Christians, writers and publishers and community people, but she was really an agnostic, and she really taught me about loving nature. So that came in pretty early on. But I was always hungry from the time I was a little girl for something spiritual. And they always said, well, if you want to go to church, you can go. Just be free. They didn't stop me, but they weren't much help. And so I was searching, I think I was really searching. And then it took a while, I kind of circled in and around a lot of different possible paths. And then I discovered Buddhism, and I was moved by it because it didn't really ask me to believe in an external God. It really points to our own Buddha nature, our own awakened nature, which is something that we all have. And the process of accessing that through meditation is the path of Buddhist practice. So, and of course, meditation is really helpful. So that was maybe one answer to that question.
Yeah. There's a beautiful bit in the book where you're in a bookstore in California and you've decided to take yourself on a silent retreat, which again is not things that the standard everyday person suddenly thinks, okay, silent retreat, that's a good thing. And you found a book about the female presences within Buddhism, as far as I can tell. And it sounds like that really gave you a baseline for what came next. So if we skip forward a little while, you met Thich Nhat of Plum Village and Interbeing, and by this time, it sounds like you were becoming more embedded in Buddhist practice being part of your identity. Would that be a reasonable thing to say?
That would. I was very moved by Thich Nhat and his teachings of what he calls engaged Buddhism, some people call sacred activism, taking us off the cushion and into the world in response to the suffering that we're witnessing, whatever that happens to be, and it's different everywhere. But I really appreciated that about him. And he became one of my very, very important teachers. I became a teacher in his lineage. But I also had a very strong interest in Tibetan Buddhism and was practicing very deeply in that tradition as well. So sort of hand in hand. And that book you mentioned that literally fell off the shelf at me, in the bookstore, is a book called Women of Wisdom. And it's by Lama Tsultrim Zangpo, who was writing about telling the stories of the great women practitioners in that form of Buddhism, whose stories you don't hear, because it's a very patriarchal system. And so mostly what we hear about are the great,
Men.
masters who happen to be men. And I was very interested in finding out more about the women, and I still am. This has been a big motivation for me, is to really bring more attention to a feminine experience. Yeah.
And then you also knew someone in the US who was of Nepalese origin, I believe, and he was the one who led you to the old man in the cave, who was 106 years old. We're talking seriously old man in the cave. So I realize you've probably taught this on about 150 other podcasts, but for the people who haven't heard it before, give us the edited highlights of the beginnings of the quest that has consumed, as far as I can tell, the last half of your life.
Yeah. Well, through a mutual friend, I was introduced to this young Lama named Lama Ngawang Tsultrim, who is from Nepal. He was in Nepal, although he does have a small center in the United States. But at the time, he was living in Nepal, and his teacher was a very old Lama whose residence was a cave way up in the Himalayas, and in a very remote part of the world. And so this friend of mine was going to meet him, and I asked if I could join him, and he said, yes, okay, you can come along. And I was just sort of possessed with wanting to go meet this old Lama. But it wasn't until I was literally walking up the path, huffing and puffing because of the altitude, to go meet this old Lama in the caves, that I realized, wow, I have the chance to go ask a question of the old wise man in the cave. What am I going to ask him? My goodness, I better come up with a good question. So then I was pretty much consumed with what would my question be. And the thing that came to me is, what can we do to bring healing and protection to the earth? And that really has always been my concern, although in a lot of ways I wasn't in with it. This was in 1990. So, a long time ago, and an early part of my life. And but when I hit on that question, I realized, that's it. And even back then, we were starting to see the signs of the unraveling of the web of light in all the ways that are now showing themselves ever more vividly. And so that was my question. And then, we got there, we met him. He welcomed us. We lived with him for several weeks before I had the chance to actually talk with him. And then I did. And he asked me what it was like, where we live. And I spoke to him about things that I was seeing and concerns that I was having. And one of the concerns being the radioactive waste that comes from the production of nuclear weapons, which is happening here in Los Alamos, the laboratory near my home in Santa Fe. where these weapons began and were still being produced, and how those substances affect the web of life, and all kinds of other things, But he said, you need to get these Earth Treasure Vases, and you need to put them in the ground, and they will do that work of bringing healing and protection to the whole area around where they're placed. And my mind really didn't know what to think, because, first of all, a little clay pot filled with prayers and symbolic offerings, I just didn't know how that could possibly do the work that is called for in these times. And yet the other part of me was going, well, okay, this change that's called for, the healing that's called for, has to happen on many levels. Who's to say how that's going to happen, or how we should address it? We have to address it in all kinds of ways. And so this is what's coming to me, okay, where can I get some? And so then we were directed to another monastery where the Lama there said, of course, how many would you like? And again, I didn't know what to say. It was like 100,000.
Yeah, exactly. What numbers? They give a number. And what size are these vases? Just tell us a little bit about.
Well, the original ones were about, kind of like
8 inches
maybe
by
that
6
fat.
inches. Yeah.
No, like maybe 8 inches tall, something like that.
And they're cylindrical, or are they kind of standard?
Yeah, they're sort of like this.
Glowy shaped, right? Yeah.
Like little bodies, whole neck, and
Right.
a little.
Yeah.
And then, so we had, I asked for 25. I didn't know what to say. And they said, well, yes, of course. And I received 30. And then some years later, I received another 40 that were about half the size. So they are about 5 or 6 inches, much, much smaller, but the same shape. And they were made at the same time. The lamas gathered a lot of very sacred substances and mixed them into the clay, and then gave them to us to fill with sacred offerings that are meaningful to us and to the people in the communities where we go, so that they can make their own offerings, and prayers into these little pots. And that process has been so amazing, really, to take this little pot to all these places around the world where healing and protection is called for, and into these communities, and work with elders and activists and young people and old people and everything in between, and just invite people to share what's in their heart mind about what they love and care about, and what they want to see protected and bring healing to. And then that all of those offerings, so to speak, are filling this little pot till it becomes almost like a living being, and then it's planted like a seed in the whole area, in the area where it is going. And then all of those prayers, all of those offerings really radiate out into the whole region. But what has happened in the course of filling them is that people really get in touch with their own calling.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
What
really matters to them. Yeah.
Exactly.
What I was really struck reading through was how much everybody who's involved in this takes it really seriously and really gets the sacred nature of what's happening. There wasn't, as far as I could tell, anyone who treated it as something mundane. Everybody dropped into that sacred level where this really matters and I will give it the best of me. And then you talk sometimes about sealing them. Is the technique of sealing them something that you were taught in Nepal, or is that dependent on where you are in the world also?
Well, there's a very traditional way of carrying this practice out, coming from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And so once they're filled, then they're sealed, and then they're planted or buried in the earth in our case, we decided they would like to have some sort of a protective container around them to keep them in the ground. And so that was always a very creative process for people involved, because each step of the way, you kind of have to figure out how you're going to do it. And the container was always a really beautiful part of it, creative part of it. But yeah, so they would be sealed, and so there's a cork that goes in the mouth, and that cork is opened and closed every time you do a ceremony to, over the course of time while the treasure vase is being filled. Um, and and then once it's full, then it's sealed with beeswax, so it won't come out. And then we drape over it some fabric that is representative of the 5 Buddha families, which is basically the mandala. So there's the center and the 4 directions of the mandala, and that really represents the prayers inside the little holy vessel going out in every direction. And then they're tied with more ties of those same 5 colors, and then sealed with the old letter sealing wax with the stamp. So we drip that onto the ties and stamp it down. So it's really sealed upon sealed. So those prayers are just in there, like, they're gonna do their job. You can feel it. And even you mentioned about people appreciating the practice. First of all, everywhere I have ever been, everyone recognizes that there is a need for help with the earth and with what's happening in this sort of unraveling that we're going through in so many ways around the world. And so there hasn't ever been anyone who goes, oh, well, no, this isn't needed. But even the most cynical people, they would take a treasure vase in their hands in one of these ceremonies, and it would come to them and they'd go, oh my goodness, it feels like it's alive, and they can tell it's like, this is for real. It's not just some, airy-fairy thing. It's a real thing. And they even those kinds of people, they would have their minds a little bit blown, I think. So they have some power, and it's like you can't figure it out. You can't say what it's going to do. There's no predicting it. And everywhere I've ever been, I've had to learn how to not project what I think should happen onto the situation, but really allow it to unfold in its own way and then be surprised and be amazed, really.
And that was something that comes through very clearly in the book, was your capacity to know when you were projecting. And, I decide we're going there, but it just doesn't happen. And then you settle and you let yourself drop in and you let something come to you from whatever is sending it. And then the synchronicities all begin to stack up and everything flows, and you know that you're heading in the right place. And I love, just before we move, I want to really look at some of the examples of places you took it. This concept of acupuncture for the earth. That this is, in a way, acupuncture. Very briefly, when I was a veterinary surgeon, I trained in veterinary acupuncture, and it is one of those things where you have to switch off your left brain because, your head mind. It's not, there is no way you can get your head around how does this work, but you can watch it working. And so therefore what you need to do is to learn how to make it work, rather than half your brain going, no, it can't, and the other half going, well, guess what it is. So I am assuming from the beginning you were within the mindset that this is working. And I was wondering whether the acupuncture for the earth concept was something that helped you to override your own inner doubts, or did you just not have any inner doubts?
No, I had inner doubts. I didn't know, I mean, it took me, I don't know, 5 or 6 years after receiving the little pods before I started working with them, because I was, first of all, really overwhelmed with how do you even approach this? And then, okay, well, if we were to approach it, where do we take them and how do we do this? And, it was just a lot of doubt, a lot of questioning, and not a lot of help, actually, in the beginning, because the the lamas were all like, well, yeah, you can do this, but it's not really the main practice. You should really be doing this, that, or the other. And for me, it was as if, well, we're crazy because look at what's happening in the
Yeah, right.
world,
Let's do this. This is the thing.
Yeah.
Right.
This is it.
Right.
So anyway, it's funny you say that about acupuncture, and my husband is a veterinarian, and he specialized in veterinary acupuncture, and he's taught it and everything, and he's not practicing too much now, but he still does. And so, of course, with acupuncture, um, you can't, and especially with animals, they can't say to you, oh, that feels really good or that's really working. You just have to observe, and it's either working or it's not. And so, yeah, I really had the feeling like these little clay pots going into the ground was like an acupuncture needle going into the earth. And um, there's all kinds of ways that balance is restored. Um, and healing is accomplished. But for us, it starts with our intentions. If we're cultivating an intention to bring healing, to be of benefit, then that is an energy that's going out into the world. And that's a good place to begin.
Really.
Not just go, oh, well, who knows?
No, exactly. Let's just plonk these anywhere because it doesn't matter and get on with what the lamas tell us we should be doing. I'm so glad you didn't.
Yeah.
There are so many stories of places you took the vases. Liberia struck me, well, they all, actually, every single one of them is really fascinating, and every single one of them could be a podcast on its own. Liberia and Australia were the two that really leapt out for me. So if that feels okay, tell us a little bit about Liberia first, and particularly if we can weave in the story of a man named Christian, because that had me weeping. It was just so moving and so profoundly obvious that change is happening.
Yeah, it was one of the places that I've been where the most obvious and tangible changes occurred. So it's a good example. Liberia, as you may or may not know, is a very small country in sort of Western Africa that had a long history of civil war and brutal civil war, very conflicted, very dangerous. And I was invited to bring a treasure vase there, or vase, as you say. After the Civil War ended, there was a group doing peace building work called the Everyday Gandhis.
Yeah, I loved that.
And I knew someone who was with them and suggested that a vase be brought there. And I mean, at the time, I didn't even know where Liberia was, so I had to learn a lot. It was actually the women who stopped the war. There's a beautiful film called Pray the Devil Back to Hell about the women's peace movement. And in any case, to make a long story short, I took a treasure vase to Liberia and met a lot of people there, including former combatants and ex-child soldiers, many of the women who stopped the war, tribal leaders, leaders of both Muslim and Christian faiths, who were all coming together to make sure that peace was upheld after the war ended. And so I went into the worst fought area of the war where this group was doing most of their work. And that's where we took the treasure vase. And it involved meeting with leaders in the community, all kinds of people, the elders, the traditional elders, and also the spiritual leaders and political leaders. And I mean, everybody just kind of came out of the woodwork, actually. And then we had to do a ceremony that the women would go into trance to ask the ancestors whether this little clay pot was something that would be wanted, whether they should accept it into their community. And I was sort of on the edge of my seat, not knowing what would happen next. And, had to be prepared for the fact that maybe it wasn't accepted. They might say no. And and then what actually did happen is that this one ancestral figure spoke through one of the women and said, yes, it was a very good thing and that they should do this. So then everybody breathed a big sigh of relief and prepared to go ahead. And we ended up having a gathering. The area that I was in shares a border with both Guinea and Sierra Leone. So the three countries, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, all were part of this war. Everybody was brought into it. And so people came from three countries for the ceremony to make offerings into the treasure vase and pray for peace. And there were hundreds of people, in this big, huge circle, all just pouring their hearts out, sitting for hours, and so when it was all full, then we sealed it, and then the drums came out, the dancing started happening, and all of that was going on, and a big feast, and then it was time to take it to where the elders had decided to bury it, and that was in the village of this one elder who had spoken during the ceremony, and the people had wanted to build what they called at the time a palaver hut, or now called a peace hut, in that village as a place to go. Traditionally, is a place to go to resolve conflict and to, kind of
Bring peace.
be together in peace.
And have mediation. It sounded like there was a kind of formal or semi-formal mediation system happening.
Exactly. And it's a traditional system that's independent of the court system, which is very corrupt, and that's a way that people resolved conflicts amongst themselves. So in any case, we went to the village to bury the treasure vase in this part of Liberia. And everybody was very involved and really deeply caring. And it was an amazing experience. And when it was all over, one of the elders turned to me and he goes, well, now what? We want to remember these prayers. This was really important to us. What do we do next? And I'm always like, it's not for me to say what you should do in your land. This is your culture, your community. I'm just coming with this little humble offering. And so I turned it back on them. I said, I don't know. What would you feel would be a good way to proceed, So what ended up happening is that they decided to build one of these peace huts in the village right where the treasure vase had been buried. And so our organization raised the money for them to do that. And we sent it over, and then they built the peace hut. And I returned about a year later to celebrate the building of the hut. And that was another amazing experience with everybody coming and celebrating and dancing and honoring this whole thing. And then the people in the village came up and said, well, all of this is very wonderful, but what we really need is water, because the women have to walk miles and miles to fetch water. And it's at certain times of year, it's not clean. So we get sick and, it's a terrible, vicious cycle. Could you help us dig a well? So I went home and raised some more money, and we sent it over, and they dug a well. And then, there was fresh water, and it was really like life returning to the land. And in the course of all of this, I got to know a lot of people over there, including one gentleman who was a former general in the country. And then again, long story short, he ended up fighting in the rebel forces in the north, in that same area in the north. And his story, his name is Christian Bethelson. His story is really powerful because he has this history, this long history of being a fighter. And then when the war ended, he had to put down his gun, like they all did. And it just so happened he met this group, the Everyday Gandhis, and they asked him if he wanted to become a peace builder. And he said yes. So his life turned completely around. And I met him not that long afterwards. And when he heard me ring the bell to initiate a period of meditation, which I was teaching, he said his life changed again. And he asked me if I would teach him how to meditate. And I couldn't believe it. It was like, really? Who, me, you? It just was one of those. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. He just pestered me until I came around, and I started to work with him. And he ended up meeting Thich Nhat Hanh. He lived off and on at Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh's community, for about 3 years. His life completely transformed. He will never pick up a gun again. His life is completely dedicated to peace.
Right. And he had been quite a notorious general, as far as I could tell from the book. His name was known, and people were deeply afraid of him. So to see him change around must have been an extraordinary thing for the whole country. I was reading a bit where he went on the radio station to tell people what he'd done, and they were getting inundated with phone calls afterwards of just gratitude that he had shifted himself. Because I guess if he could do it, anyone could do it.
Exactly. So yeah, I still work with him, and he's still, hoping to bring peace to the world. It's sometimes takes a long time, for those kinds of deep changes to take root. But we ended up building 5 peace huts in different conflict-prone regions of Liberia.
Right.
There's a whole peace building program that he and his colleague Harper Carmen direct with some of the women who are very involved in the work under the peace huts. And there's been some wonderful things that have come from taking a treasure vase to Liberia, and the transformation within the people and within him.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's worth saying that certainly, as far as I was aware, Liberia was the place you were most likely to be raped as a woman, like pretty close to 100%.
That you might be thinking about Congo, because I also Congo,
yes,
the Democratic Republic of Congo. No worries, they're both really bad places,
but they're becoming better. That's the thing to remember. Yes, no, you're right. It was Congo.
Yeah. After I went to Liberia, I realized I had to go to Congo because I was starting to really identify some of the what I call core wounds in the world that if we're talking about, healing the earth, we have to address. And the rape of women is one of them because it's so epidemic and is in, every corner, every street corner, every household of the planet practically, But the worst place in the world is supposedly the Democratic Republic of Congo. And when I learned about that, I became interested in going there with this prayer, and the connection between the rape of women and the rape of the earth is very obvious also, really. How we treat each other and how we treat Mother Earth is needs to change, So that was a very important trip as well, to go there into the heart of the world, which heart of Africa, which is so important. And I met the indigenous peoples of the forest in Congo who brought the treasure vase into their hearts, and met with a lot of women and did some incredible work with Nema Namadamu, who is one of my global sisters, and started an organization called Hero Women Rising. And truly, Congo is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And so this attitude about Congo also really needs to change. But it's the minerals that Congo is so rich in minerals, and those minerals are what fuels, this.
Right. Yeah. And the
And
whole fossil-free renewable
yeah.
revolution that is in fact just going to destroy other places.
So anyway, that's another
Yes,
story in
that's
the
a
book.
whole, yes.
Right? You
Yes.
wanted to go,
To
I think,
Australia.
maybe somewhere. Yeah, to
Yes. Yes.
Australia.
Tell us a little bit about Australia, because that just all the synchronicities of that. The Dalai Lama. Tell us about that, and the
Well,
various ramifications of that, I think, is what was so interesting.
well, I'd be curious to know what what caught your attention. It was incredible for me though, because I sort of thought, okay, well, I was trying to take this practice all around the planet and to, cover as much ground as we possibly could. And I realized Australia is a whole continent. I got to go there, but I didn't really have a feeling of exactly what the calling was, for Australia until it was just about ready to go. And then I realized, I think this is going to be a really important trip. And I went into Australia. The people that I was partnering with had organized us to start with teachings from the Dalai Lama
Who
in
just
Sydney, and
happened to be in Australia at the time you were going there, I
just
think. The
happened.
synchronicity of that is
And
gorgeous.
it is, and they organized for the little treasure vase to sit on the altar in the great big huge hall where all his thousands of people were gathered, and there he was, and he picked it up one day and he chuckled and he just said, "Oh, ho, ho, this little pot," and kind of gave it his blessing. And then everywhere we went, because we went around the continent, especially to Uluru, which is the big, beautiful, amazing monument, natural rock formation in the middle of the desert. We were welcome to country, which is a traditional practice that the elders from each region will, if you're lucky, they will welcome you to their land. And that it makes it possible it's almost like the portal opens, and you suddenly have your own connection to the spirits of the land, the ancestral energies of the land, the beings of the place. And it's an important practice for them, the Aboriginal people, to enter, properly to a new place. And so we were taught about that, and the treasure vase was blessed by the custodial elder of Uluru, who was the one who originally invited me to come to our Uncle Bob Randall, who's no longer um, alive, but who, we honor deeply for his incredible teachings about unconditional love with responsibility that he calls kanini. And so we received him, his blessing. And then we traveled up to the Northern Territory into Arnhem Land, and were introduced to another elder who became my adopted mother, Auntie Margaret Catherine, from the Jawan people. And she took all of us under her wing and just,
She gave you skin names, and I wondered if that came from kin names, or what is a skin name? Can you tell us that a bit?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure of how it originally came about, but those tribes of Aboriginal people they establish the familial connection between everyone. So it helps to keep everyone in their proper relationship. And if you were to cross that into other kinds of relationships, that's not a good thing.
Yes.
So it's a way of keeping harmony, really, within the context of a tribe. And so it was important for her that we all understood our relationship to each other as well. So she recognized me as her daughter, and I have 3 brothers now from Australia who were there in very important roles on that journey. And all of us in the group got identified, aunties, uncles, sisters, brothers, father, mother, grandfather, all of it. It was like,
Right.
there we all were. And so we became family.
Yeah. And it felt like a functional family. And so many of us come from dysfunctional families. You probably didn't, but it's in the West, the chances are, there we go. There's a strong chance it came from a dysfunctional family. And then Auntie Margaret has created a functional family around everything that you're doing. It just felt so beautiful.
It was so beautiful, Manta. And I needed that for my own healing, because I did have some challenges within my own family. And so this was really healing. I always wanted brothers. I didn't have brothers. Now I have brothers. And then by that time, this was the last of the first pilgrimage to Australia, was to plant the last of the original set of Earth Treasure Vases in Australia. Out of that came this second generation I mentioned in the beginning. And I had brought 4 more for each of the 4 directions of that continent, because the Australian people were so moved by this practice. They really connected with it in a big way. But so we'd been around, and we were, this kind of global family was coming together around the practice. But we didn't realize we were a family until she made us one, and then all of a sudden there was just such a sense of connection between us. And that has helped tremendously in what we now call the Gaia Mandala. It's a whole global community of people all around the world who are sharing this great love of the earth and with and for each other. And, she really helped us to claim our relationship to each other and the earth in a way that was so deeply meaningful. And I ended up going back more or less 3 times in a row to bless this second generation starting up, going into some other incredible places in Australia, including a 50,000-year-old rock shelter that she was the custodial
that you can only
elder
get
of.
to by helicopter. Is that the one? Right.
That's right.
Yeah. And she took archaeologists there, which just struck me as, it was that a good thing.
Well, some archaeologists were flying around by helicopter kind of over that land, looking around to see what they might find. And they looked down, they went, oh, that's interesting. I don't know, maybe we should land and go take a look, and they did. And they found this place, which of course her people knew about for
tens of thousands of
years. Yeah. And she was the elder who had carried the knowledge about this place. So they found her, and she was the one that they worked with to understand the significance of this place. It's got paintings, going on the ceiling, 30 some odd rock supports for a ceiling that then is covered with art going back that long.
Right.
And it's just an unbelievably incredible place that is kind of like the Sistine Chapel,
Right.
It's just so amazing. And that's where she invited us to go with one of the little vessels, which is planted in a
secret
private,
place.
secret art pool.
It sounded like quite a lot of them were secret, but then some of the African ones sounds like there were actually hundreds of people watching you plant it. So some of them.
Well, in Liberia, when you're dealing with a war zone, you can't have secrecy. It doesn't develop trust.
Yeah.
So we did that publicly, but many of them are placed in a way where no one should ever be able to find it. No. It's not like we go, oh, here's where it is, everybody.
Yes, come and dig it up anytime you like. Well, I do have visions of, 10,000 years down the line, if we make it through, somebody's going to find one by accident. And it's going to trigger one of those, oh my goodness, look what we just found. It's amazing. It's an ancient artifact. And you planted it. It's going to be cool. And in Australia, it felt like you dropped into the Dreamtime, it seemed to me. And you said you really entered a different state of reality. And the state of reality that, as far as I can tell, the indigenous peoples live in quite a lot. I don't know if you've read Tyson Yunkaporta's latest book, Right Story, Wrong Story, but it's beautiful. And I read Summoned by the Earth just after I'd read that. So I was in that Australian space. And he talks, the whole book is beautiful and very much deals with this space, but there's a bit in it where he's describing the making of a dugout canoe, and the adults are going off making canoe, but the young people, the children, are playing in a bend of the north bank of the river, jumping in and out of the water, because today it is safe and tomorrow it won't be. The crocodiles will be there. And he just drops that in. And then 100 pages later on, he says, we don't have the Paleolithic fight and flight response that you white people have, because we know where the predators are always. And that flipped my, we make so many assumptions of who we are and who our ancestors were and who Indigenous people are. That is, they were very much like us, except they didn't have iPhones. But otherwise, their physiological responses were the same, and it just isn't true. And I wondered, did you, this is purely my own brain exploring different avenues, did you sink into a space where you felt the rest of the web of life alive around you, such that you knew where the predators were?
Something happened for me in Australia that when now we're touching on it, it makes me cry. And I'm not sure I could say I knew where the predators were, but I felt intimately connected to the entire web of life, yes. I mean, I feel there was a moment, I do write about it in the book, but there was a moment where I was alone in the location where we ended up burying that first vase on Auntie Margaret's land, not the rock shelter, but before that. And it was such a fulfillment for me because it was the last of the original ones, and I had been just, so deeply committed to doing this. And there we were. And my group I was staying there so that they could come to me. And the sun was going down, the full moon was rising. I'm forgetting the name of the animals that are like coyotes that we have here. Dingoes were howling, kind of out there. I had my back up against the rock. I was touching the earth, just giving thanks for this moment. And it was just like everything fell into place. Later that night, after we had done what we came to do, we were sitting around the fire, which is something that you do in the outback of Australia. Just sit around the fire, and tell stories. And Auntie Margaret had said to my brother Ben, she said, she called the vase my teacher. She thought that was my teacher. And she said her teacher is in the Dreamtime now. It's entered the Dreamtime. We will tell this story to all who come after, and we will remember this moment and these intentions. And then we were just sitting there like we couldn't sleep because we had kind of awakened, to this so much larger reality. Ben said, the vase has entered the Dreamtime. The song lines have come to life, the way we speak about the connection between places. And there in that outback, there's no electricity. The sky is just filled with stars, and the thick stars fall all the way down to the ground. I mean, as far as the eye can see, it's just so incredibly vast. And the people carry such an awareness of the vastness of the interconnected web of life that is just impossible to even put into words. That awareness was awakened.
Exactly, and you felt it. And I think this gives me enormous hope that white Western people, from whatever background, can connect to the web of life and can feel it move through you. And so I'd like to take us to that, because it feels like the vases are still ongoing. Perhaps in the end there might be 108 of them. There might be a fourth wave. If you want to talk a little bit about the ones that are made in the US, great. But I'm really, really interested as we head down to the wire of our hour about your journey now with Tara, Gaia, with the web of life and its place in your life. And also where I really want to get to is ordinary people listening who probably aren't going to give 34 years of their life to doing amazing spiritual work around the world, but can still do amazing things in their own communities. How can we help them to deepen their connection? But let's carry on with you and where you're at. The first wave, acupuncture points set, and then the amazing acupuncture channels have wakened up and you can see them and feel them. Where does that take us?
Well, for me, the assignment really brought me into the realization that the earth is our greatest teacher in these times. And of course, Aboriginal cultures and indigenous peoples all over the world have looked to the earth as the great teacher. But us white folks in the dominant culture on life on earth are missing a lot of those teachings. But I was hungering for that inside of the Buddhist teachings that I love so much and have studied so deeply. But the patriarchal system of how those teachings are passed on was a bit problematic, along with some of the abuses, the abuse of power that is often experienced not just in that tradition, many traditions and systems. So I was grappling with a lot of those kinds of things at the same time as doing all of this. And I realized that, the earth really is an amazing teacher. That the earth is just the embodiment of the greatest teacher, of the greatest teachings, and of the community that practices them. Like this is what we talk about in Buddhism. The three jewels is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which is the teacher, the teachings, and the community. And so those three jewels are, perfectly embodied in this great jewel in space, Mother Gaia. This living being, this incredibly vast, unbelievably beautiful living being, of which we are each a part. We're not separate.
Yes.
So
we are an integral part of the web of life, yes. But it's the separability or the sense that we are separate that has something happened in the history of our culture that didn't happen to Auntie Margaret's people or the indigenous peoples of the Congo or anywhere else. And we lost that knowing. But what I'm hearing from you is that you're finding it again.
Well, I'm finding it again, yes. And I began to turn my allegiance, really, to Mother Gaia. And I, through carrying out the treasure vases, I really learned to listen to the earth and to be guided by her needs and to answer to her calling, her summons. That's why I called my book The Summoned by the Earth. And so gradually that has become the focus for me. And so I'm kind of, carving a new path really, because at a certain point I had to kind of decide, where I wanted to focus and how my own spiritual practice. And a whole practice came to me in addition to this, the way we carry out the treasure vases, which is a practice of, I call her the Sublime Mother Gaia. And I had done a practice from the Tibetan tradition for many years of Tara, who you probably have heard of. And she's a, revered, beloved deity in that tradition. And she helped me a lot. She's supposed to come when called. And these are, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we talk about these deities, but they're really just personifications of our own innate nature, our own awakened nature. And so I called on Tara a lot, and she did help. But she began to then evolve really for me into a personification of Mother Gaia. And so I teach that practice now, and it has its own mantra and visualization, and it's a beautiful practice. And when I teach it, I'm always so surprised and moved by how hungry people are for such a practice, because we all do receive so much benefit from going out into nature. We come back to our true selves, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say. We come back to our own true nature. It's a reflection of our own nature, when we go into the forest or to the ocean or, hike up the mountain, whatever it is, that takes us into that experience with the stars falling from the sky, and we take note and we remember this is how we can restore our own balance. So, it's one thing to carry out this Earth Treasure Vase and take it all around the world. It's another thing to realize that actually every one of us is a holy vessel. We are a vessel filled with profound gifts for the world that is coming from our deepest love and caring for life. And the dominant culture will, do a lot to try to convince us that we don't have that power, or that it's not important, or we can't do whatever it is we think we want to do, that we can. And so accessing that calling, that summons within our own selves, realizing that we have, as part of the web of life, interconnected with Gaia herself, we have a gift to give. Each of us has an offering that is going to be important for restoring that balance to the world. And we need to give it, actually. This is the time for what I now talk about, a collective awakening. The time of the individual awakening is kind of over. We realize we're in this together. We can't do it alone. It's way too big. So I give thanks for all the people who've come forward now to help carry this practice out, which is continuing through others. Anyway, I don't know if that
Totally. I've got so
many
many questions, Cynthia, and I want to not drag us off into my own pet agendas. So you have Gaia Mandala, your website, which I will link in the show notes. And people can come along, and as far as I can tell, online, they can do full moon meditations. They can come and explore Tara Gaia work with you. And they can deepen this practice a lot. One of the things that the students that I teach are often asking, a lot will come with the question of what is mine to do? How do I discover what is mine to do? And I don't have a clear answer for that other than sit very still, get to know everything that goes on inside you, and something will arise that will feel different, and you will know it when it's there, and your head mind will try and give you 1,000 options, and you just need to learn to let them go. I suspect you have a much clearer, better, more succinct answer than that. If somebody were to come to you saying, how do I find what's mine to do? And I'm guessing quite a lot of people do. What is your response to that?
Sure. Well, it is different for everybody, And so we all have to find our own way, and we all want someone to tell us what to do. But in fact, it is about coming back to our true self and forming a relationship with her or with him or with them. And so one way of doing that is to stop for a little while and take a few breaths. Come back to this incredible system that is operating in us with every breath that connects us to the breath of life, you know? When we breathe with awareness, we're actually connecting with the life force of Mother Gaia. We would die without that breath. So that's an important thing to do. And we are usually so distracted that we don't even realize this is going on. But when we can stop for even just a few breaths, we come back right away. We come back to our own nature. We come back to that capacity to conspire. And to conspire with something so much larger than ourselves. And we realize, so when we do stop, it's like we start to see, oh my gosh, I've been just so consumed with this, that, and the other that is so irrelevant to the big picture, and we lose our way. So that's one thing. And of course, meditation is a way to do that. So just coming back to the present moment, not trying to figure it out.
Yes. Heart, mind, not head, mind. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then...
So, and then...
are you seeing then? Because you said individual awakening, the time is, we need now to be in the collective awakening. And it seems to me, or it feels to me, that whatever the trauma was that separated our culture, Francis Weller has a concept of initiation culture and trauma culture, which I find very compelling. But a long, long time ago, probably 10, 12,000 years ago, something separated our ancestors from the web, such that we are the inheritors of that sense of not knowing how to ask for the help that we need, or even being certain that the help is always there. Some of us are coming back. It feels to me as if the worst excesses of the trauma culture are flaring now, more than they have ever done in the history of the world, as far as we know, or in the history of our culture. And yet also, there are treasure vases now planted all over the world. There are people who are turning away from being military psychopaths to being connected and to knowing how to breathe and to listening to the sound of the bell. And so when I sit still enough, I have a sense of I could at any moment choose to give compassion and joy and wonder and gratitude out into the world, or I could give my despair and my rage and my terrible grief. And that one or other of those feeds one or other side of what feels like a quite finely balanced set of balances. Does that concur with your concept and perception?
Yeah. And the more we feed the spirit of what we want to see in the world, the more that comes into being.
Right.
You know? So, and if it's too difficult to stop for a few breaths on our own, we need to find others to stop with who will support that transformation. And the tree outside the door is a great place to start, to go and breathe with the tree and put your back up against it and go, okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Literally touch the ground. Ask for a relationship with the world, the natural world, the world of Mother Gaia. Give her your gratitude for your life, Make steps of peace. Make offerings. And that's another thing that we've forgotten about. If we want to have a relationship of balance and harmony in our lives, it is helpful to give back and not just take all the time.
And give things that we value of ourselves, of our time, of our being.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways that we can begin to transform our lives and to begin to access that which is our true calling, which gives us joy, which gives us a sense of purpose, and connects us to the larger community, the web of life. When we're doing what we hate, we're not connected in the way that we need to be.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. Yes. And modernity is so obviously collapsing all around us that doing the things we hate needs to stop being a thing. We're very nearly at the end of our hour. I am interested in how the people who still exist within what was, at least at the beginning, quite a patriarchal system that you worked within. And now you are teaching what feels to me like a very feminine spiritual version of the teachings that they were holding. How are they taking that?
Well, that's a very good question. Some of them don't like it very much.
Darn. I was so hoping you were going to say, yeah, they've all come to the realization that this is what the world needs and they're right behind me. No.
There's some that are really hanging on to the past and a certain way of being that's very, you could say, maybe fundamentalist. There's others who are all for it. For example, the foreword to my book was written by Robert Thurman, who is a Westerner, but he's been involved in Tibetan Buddhism for his pretty much his entire life and very close to the Dalai Lama. And he wrote an amazing foreword to my book that was a mind blower for me, really, because I didn't imagine someone like him would even, I don't know, I didn't expect it. Because I am kind of speaking out, about some of the things that need to change. But it kind of remains to be seen. I would like welcome more responses from the traditional world of the Dharma. But I also feel like where the practice has led me is into the wider world. I really I'm not that interested in just being held within the context of Buddhism, because I think the issues that we're dealing with and the call for healing that is needed is so much bigger and so much broader. And we have to bring it about. We all have to bring it about, no matter who we are or where we are.
Right. And so we don't limit ourselves by labeling as a particular tradition. We just are doing the best that we can at any given moment. So we are nearing the end of our hour. Cynthia, this has been amazing. Your book is genuinely life-changing. And I will say as often as I can that I think anyone listening to this would really benefit from reading it. And then coming to your website and engaging with you in the ways that people can, and in person if you're in the States, and then online if you're not. Is there anything else that you would like to say to a collected group of fairly motivated people?
Well, hello to all of you. I hope I get to meet you more. I do have this full moon meditation that is a community practice online every month, where we really activate this global healing mandala of treasure vase locations and invoke all the locations and invite people to put their own offerings and prayers into a treasure vase that we're working with currently. And there's a number of them that are in the process of going out into the world. So anyone can join that meditation, and we welcome you to join us. The practice of the Sublime Mother Gaia that I mentioned also is a beautiful practice, and I'll be teaching that both in person and online coming up in the not too distant future. I just led a retreat on that recently. I'm also coming to Europe next year. And so, I was just thinking, I don't have my schedule, set yet, but I will be doing some in-person retreats and traveling to some various countries in Europe. So, Amanda, we should keep in touch about that. And one way the best way for people to keep in touch is to sign up to receive the full moon newsletter, which we send out every month. prior to the full moon, talking about what the focus is for the full moon meditation, and then any other things that are going on, like retreats and stuff. So there's a lot that you can get involved with through the newsletter and through the website, and people can see all that. And the book is available pretty much anywhere you
get good books.
Yeah.
Ideally
And,
not the giant vampire squid wrapped around the face
Yeah.
of humanity, but if it has to be that, it's better than nothing. And then you put the reviews on the giant vampire squid, because sadly our publishers are really happy if that happens. Alrighty, and as and when I know when you're coming to Europe, I will mention it at the start or the end of a podcast. So there you go, people. It's a reason to keep listening. Find out when Cynthia's coming to Europe. Although obviously you could find out through the website too. Cynthia, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for all that you are and do, and for making the time and giving us of your wisdom and your beauty and your light. We will definitely come back again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, wonderful to be with you.